I am Michelle Erberg, and I am one of the co-conveners of the Digital Scholarship section, Digital Collections Discussion Group. I'm here with my co-convener, Ashley Sergiadis, who I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And we are co-sponsoring, along with the Digital Scholarship Section's Open Research Discussion Group, led by Verletta Kern and Brianna Marshall, a follow-up webinar on algorithmic bias. And our co-presenters for this webinar, which is a follow-up of what we presented in July of earlier this year. And I do believe there's a recording available for that. If people want it, we can share it around again afterward. But today we're going to continue on with a more hands-on version of what we presented earlier this summer. The two speakers that we have today, Jason Clark and Julian Kaptanian, are both affiliated with Montana State University. Jason is a professor and head of special collections and archival informatics at Montana State University in the libraries, where he builds digital library applications and sets digital content strategy. His current research interests include linked data, search engine optimization, web services and APIs, interface design, and application development. If you want to see more of his work, it's available at jasonclark.info, and that link is on the first slide there as well. Julian Kaptanian is an undergraduate senior, and Julian is in the Science, the Environment, Technology, and Society program at MSU, and is currently working with Jason on the presentation today is part of a larger IMLS grant project called Search, Unpacking the Algorithms that Shape Our UX. And this is a project for which Julian is serving as a teaching and research assistant. You can read more about her work at there's a news article at the MSU website. Actually, that brings me to a question for Gina. Gina, can we share things with our audience? Okay, I don't have an answer for that from her, but I'm gonna paste this link to all panelists, and I'm hoping that she can help us share it. With that, I will defer to our speakers, Jason and Julian, to learn about open data activism in search of algorithmic transparency, algorithmic awareness in practice. Thank you for presenting today.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the intro. Thanks, Ashley, for the invite, and thanks to Verletta and Brianna for also wanting us, suggesting we follow up on some of this activity. I'm going to note the hashtags, so if you want to do some more back channel conversations later, use ACRL DSS. Julian and I can watch there. We'll also be actively watching the chat inside of or during the session. I'm going to let Julian just mic check for a second.
Hi everyone, this is Julian. I just wanted to clarify one thing. Thank you for the introduction, Michelle. I am studying the history of science and technology here at MSU, and just wanted to note that.
Perfect. So we'll kind of move quickly into the, really what we wanted to do today is in honor of Open Access Week and open data. We wanted to start to frame some of the work we've been doing around data transparency or introduce algorithms inside of that continuum. So briefly today, we'll talk a little bit about algorithm, and this intro is similar to what we talked about in July, Michelle mentioned. But what I'm going to try and move us more closely towards is the activism moment that I think this particular time and place calls for, and this particular technology, or these technology implementations. The core of today will really be about some exercises that we've done as parts of modules and a series of workshops. So we'll do 2 exercises related to how do you build competencies and just awareness of algorithms and what they are, what they do. We'll take a quick moment to just unpack a bit about what Julian and I have seen as we've taught this, and what seems to work best. And then we'll kind of conclude with the idea of where do we go from here. It's always interesting to problematize and to find where technology is problematic. What we're going to try and do is reframe it towards the end and talk more practically about where do we go from here. Okay. So again, one of the things we usually talk about when we introduce this idea is just the idea of material consequences to technology or to algorithmic work. So this is a screenshot of the wrong person who was identified in the Vegas shooting nearly 3 years ago. This led to people coming to his door, people blacklisting him online, and then only to find out that this was the wrong man. So there are these dire consequences to when an algorithm kind of goes wrong or does go wrong. And sometimes the response is sort of a meh, well, it happened. That's an engineering problem, right? But it doesn't even have to. You can also think through the ways that in the day-to-day, in even the banal encounters of our world, algorithms kind of inform what we do. So this is another article more related to how just the idea of lunch and of not having to be in line, of working through some of these systems that actually, Ranjan is actually suggesting that what's lost in that is the social moment. And so the algorithm, the recommendation algorithm, here's your food, here's what you should buy for lunch, and that being automated, that moves us out of social situations. So even in whether we're getting coffee, so it doesn't have to be algorithmic processes inform and shortchange all kinds of areas of our lives. So when we say the algorithm did it, we're really kind of speaking to this ghost or something unseen, this thing we don't really understand. And so as our experiences are more and more mediated by these processes, and what we're defining, Julian and I define algorithms in this moment as the code and computational processes embedded into our software. We engage in these systems and we find the recommendations and we speculate about where, what our digital fingerprint is or what our likes are doing, but we have a real trouble understanding what that means. And we noted this even before the grant work had started, that this was a newer digital literacy that we wanted to pursue. And if you look at this isn't necessarily news, it's more, and I do want to qualify, it's, Facebook is an example of this work, but it's not the only example. In some of our other modules, we talk about e-commerce, sites like Amazon. We talk about the social media timelines of Twitter and Facebook, but we also talk about the entertainment algorithms inside of Netflix and stuff like that. So it's in a lot of different places. And then the thing that caught me about this thread is that quote at the end. Facebook is in effect in control of your political beliefs and your worldview if they know they're controlling what you see, right? So the questions we wanted to try to bring out in this session are, what if those algorithms weren't invisible, and what if they were part of the open data continuum in honor of Open Access Week and open data work? And we think we have a way into this in an activist kind of mode. So GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union, asks for a right to an explanation. And specifically, the data subjects, so that would be a consumer like ourselves, have the right to obtain from a controller, so a software or an entity that's created an algorithmic process, meaningful information about the logic involved. I'm just going to let that sit for a second. So what this is, given the nature of the web, this is by proxy kind of an international potential requirement. There's a lot, lawyers can move through this and debate the merits or how far the logic needs to be explained, but there is a provision inside of this regulation that asks for some kind of transparency around algorithmic processes. So there's our activist moments. And so what we're seeing and what Julian and I want to propose today is that these new forms of digital literacy are activism. And you can look at things like the application of algorithms. We've done work to establish very early principles of what is an algorithm, what is a basic algorithm, how does a search process work, how does a recommendation algorithm work. Then the first exercise we're really going to take the group through is what does it look like to kind of build an algorithm in pseudocode? And just as we were thinking through this, I want you all to be thinking of the various activities or behaviors that algorithms start to inform. So I'm not going to read them, but you can kind of see them on the page themselves. Things like searching, ranking, sorting. And as we also think about, again, this is more of just a proof of concept, because what we want to do is the idea of an algorithm in action. This is something that, when you talk about first principles, there is a technology that sits inside of something like the Facebook social graph. So it's Dijkstra's algorithm or weighted graph network. And you can kind of see how it might work. So Julian is here. She's connected to me in certain ways that have value. Then I have my wife is connected to me in one primary way, but that circle becomes stronger based on the number of weights in the relationship of the graph. And you can see, like, secondarily removed, Tia was a student of ours that worked with us, but more related through Julian to me. Right? So the first exercise we're going to talk through is, and this is where actually Julian's going to speak a bit more. Well, there are two exercises. The first one we're going to talk to is how do you write an algorithm? And then the second one will be a data profile and a user experience. So I'm going to hand the mic to Julian.
So the first exercise that we really want to walk through is programming the library. So what we're going to ask you to do is program different goals and actions of a library. So if someone does walk in, what are the sorts of things they would ask? What are the sorts of areas they would go to? And sort of putting these really physical concepts and something that is sort of difficult, right? It's a sensory environment. How do you put that expression into a computer program using pseudocode language? And so sort of the point is to theorize examples of the workings of an algorithm, and just sort of give also a little introduction to coding and sort of balancing between this technical and comprehensive learning and sort of, again, that like very physical environment. So pseudocode, in this instance, we're going to talk about it. Just no need to be worried about if this exercise would ever run on a computer. The main point is just to sort of see that coding language and see the ways that aspects of the environment can be lost when put into computer code. So this is our example, and I'm actually going to share with you the template of this, and then you can actually add your own goals. Let's see.
just one person?
Yeah, so if you are in a group, then definitely just one person has to sort of run it. And so you can open this template that I just pushed through into the chat in a text editor and just work through adding your own values and decisions. Make sure one goal is complex, so adding methods to it. And then at the end, we're going to go ahead and come back and discuss, and we have some questions for you. And feel free to add any questions in the group message, and we're more than happy to answer. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and give you 5 to 7 minutes, and just feel free to, if you're all done, send a little chat that you're ready to go, or we can check back in a few minutes. Hi, so I see a question about how to use the template, and I'm going to go ahead and switch back to there we go. I'm going to switch back to our example. So in this case, you can sort of see how adding your own goals at the top could be, in our case, we used food, research, testing, socializing, sort of those aspects. And it definitely does not have to be perfect. And I mean, mostly the point of pseudocode is to get you to start thinking about sort of if-then statements or if-else statements. And definitely don't worry about the commas and dashes.
That's what it's asking, fill out the text.
Yeah, just fill out the text part yourself where it says add one of your method results here. Yeah, can you walk us through what each line of code means?
Should we?
Yeah, and we can definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first, if we start on line 5 in this example, the action item is just the top line. So then line 6, the if goal, that means, so in those cases, that's where you'll put in sort of your own example. If it's food, and then going back to where, if someone walked into the library, asked the question, I would like food, where would they go? Maybe the coffee shop. If not there, they could go to the vending machine. And of course, these are going to be very different for each person and each library you're thinking of. Mostly the point is to sort of get you thinking about what would be the question each person asks when they come into a library, and where could they potentially get information. Does that help?
It doesn't give each line of code.
And then in the more complex goal, where you have the methods and then the print, that as, oh, I can't write on there. Do I copy it somewhere? Yeah, so if you put it in a text editor, but you can also put it just in a Word document, if that is helpful. Yeah. How's everyone doing on that? Yeah, I think we're going to give you another 5 minutes or so. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap it up here.
Oh, there's a few questions in the chat about what's the difference between a goal and a complex goal?
Yeah, so the complex goal just has the different methods to it. So in our example here that we just pulled up was going to the reference desk, and then there's different ways of achieving that goal. Versus for the first one of food was just different locations. But I think we're gonna bring it back to the large group here and sort of get into more of the discussion questions. If everyone's feeling ready to go. But I wanna point out that part of this exercise is to sort of show that, I mean, looking at something that's code and looking at something that's sort of put into an algorithm can be very intimidating and difficult to read. And part of this exercise is to sort of break that sort of barrier and sort of get you into a different form of thinking, because obviously we're not all coders here, not super familiar. So definitely understand the difficulties, because when I look at things like this, I definitely get a bit frozen. But just wanted to sort of reach out to the group and see what were some of your goals, and sort of how did you decide on locations or actions? Yeah, and feel free to put anything in the chat. Kendra, I really liked your comment that you had actually done this exercise with like 90 freshmen a month ago. It sounded very productive, that it went well. I mean, it's awesome. Yeah, so Lucy said goals were getting a textbook, methods were physical reserves, digital reserves, or bookstore. Prioritize the first two because they're free students. Yeah, that is great. Thank you. Feel free to throw more out there if anyone has any others. Or honestly, answering any of the discussion questions that pique your interest, it's totally open. Yeah, one of the ones Jason and I have definitely held a lot of interest in is, how do you see bias developing in algorithms that you create? And sort of definitely linking back to question 4, how is an algorithm different from human direction? And I think those two really play into each other.
See, that's super practical. That's so cool. I've never seen that one. Yeah, Jenna, your goal of heating the building, that, and listing the message of Hadback. Explaining, yeah, that's yeah, exactly. People do come into the library with tons of needs, and algorithms can only address a few. I mean, especially our exercise in particular. But I mean, Jason and I have definitely discussed, when we first started doing this, sort of our different needs when we come into the library, him as an instructor and me as a student. And those were vastly different. In particular, yeah, Jason had first gone to, let me see a reference librarian, who can I talk to do research? And I sort of asked, like, which floor is the best for studying on? Because at least at our library, the second floor is much more social versus the third floor is much more oriented towards studying. And those were just quite different depending on who we are as people and also our role in an institution. Yeah, feel free to add any more thoughts before we move on. I'll maybe give it a few more minutes if anyone wants to add anything.
Yeah, if not, we can keep moving. And if more points come up, feel free to toss them in there and we can always talk about them more. So this next part that we really want to touch on is data profiles, transparency, personalization, and algorithms. Data profiling is the process of examining the data available from existing information, collecting statistics and information, and summarizing that data in certain ways. So more specifically, we really want to talk about Google and Facebook and those data profiles. So Facebook is one of our first examples. I'm actually just going to touch on this, so you guys will have access to the slides. And Facebook gathers a lot of information about you. There is here on this slide an instruction sheet of how to download your data. And that download can take quite a while. I think I received mine a day or 2 days, I think it was almost 2 days later after I had asked for it. So we just wanted to give you this information to have and have access to on the slides for your own empowerment and knowledge. So our next exercise is going to be your Google profile, which you can also download in a similar way to your Facebook profile, but you can also open certain parts of it just within your browser. So for this next one, you'll open up a window, and it does not have to be Google Chrome. Google Chrome was just the browser I used that's specific to these instructions. But you'll go to your Google account, and I know some of you are in groups over there, so if someone wants to volunteer their data, that would be great. And if not, I also will pull up my own data that we can have some talking points on. But in the upper corner, there's some settings, and then manage your Google account, or click on your Google picture, and then you can find your way through data and personalization. And then add personalization is what we specifically want to focus on. And then step 4 is how you can download your data from here. But again, this does take a while. So I think we're gonna focus on going through steps 1 through 3, and then we're gonna have some more discussion after that. Yeah, and please move forward any questions, and I'm happy to answer and help where I can.
And Julian, just to clarify, those instructions work for, like, if you're using Safari or what are the other, trying to think, do people still use Internet Explorer? I think that's kind of gone by the wayside, but you have to be inside of your Google account. That's the key. Chrome isn't the key.
Yeah, so if you, in step number 2, I think Google Chrome specific is the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. Whereas just in any browser, I think you can go to like a Google search box, and then that's when your picture and sort of your profile can show up. And through that, you can go through settings and manage your account.
Oh, we got an awesome thing from Anne, and I can't see the second part of that name.
Oh yeah, perfect. myaccount.google.com. I just want to do a little check-in and see if everyone is ready to go. Feel free to shoot a little chat.
Hey, look, Julian, it looks like a couple of us are in a situation where we've turned off our ad personalization. I know I've done that because I'm interested in protecting my identity just a little bit. So what do we do in that situation?
Yeah, I think that's going to bring an awesome sort of different perspective to the discussion. I'm really looking forward to what you all have to say. So let's go ahead and move on to that. Oh, it's going to let me.
Yeah, like stalls.
Mhm.
Hit this and then did you want?
Oh yeah, that's. So this is my ad personalization from a couple months ago. And for those of you who've turned it off, I'm curious as to sort of what you think in general of like how your experience has been, and sort of for those of you who still have it turned on, who've come to sort of this ad personalization section, like what's surprising. At least in my instance, there's quite a few things on this list that are quite accurate, and there's also quite a few things that are not. Like celebrity and entertainment news, I don't think I've ever searched for. Whereas cats, I've definitely searched for way too often. And then another aspect, just for discussion, is how, advertisers show, and then you can go into each category, like Zappos for me, and sort of see why the advertiser has shown these. And then even turning it off, which some of you have done. When I went to that, it almost seems so coercive of an argument that you'll still see ads, but they're not going to be useful anymore, and they still won't be turned off for specific advisors, and any interests you have won't be saved. And it's sort of this one quote at the end: with personalization off, ads you see can still be based on general factors like the subject of what you're looking at, the time of day, or your general location. And I just think, I think that's a really interesting aspect, that sort of Google really, really wants you to turn on your personalization, and they sort of subsume their argument with, even if you do have it turned off, we're still going to know a lot about what you're doing.
It's interesting. Depending on your job.
Oh,
and
yeah.
What machine you're on.
Definitely. Jason just pointed out that Enid's comment was maybe depending on your job and what you're searching for. If that's for other people, that could have a large effect. Oh yeah, and your sort of employment and how that plays into it.
What are the people who turned off?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up again with those who have their ads turned off. What did you see anything, or is it just blank? Oh yeah, Michelle, I definitely see some store adverts that are relevant. Yeah. Ah, okay, it's just blank.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So there's your activism moment. Turn it off.
Yeah, turn it off. Mine.
Mm-hmm.
You can make it blank if you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any other thoughts before we sort of move on to the next part? Yeah, tying to your emails and sort of Google's overarching hand. Yeah, the whole ecosystem that Google has a hand in your emails, and even if you use Drive, all of your documents. And
turning it down, but it's mostly kind of a did you know moment for your students.
Yeah, and Jason just mentioned that sort of this exercise is definitely a great point in seeing sort of those did you know moments, and also a way of sort of bringing back that empowerment of knowing that you do have access to this information, and you can turn off your ads if you'd like. And you do have access to things like, I think it was mentioned in the chat, Instagram, Facebook, Google. You do have access to that data. So this next point I want to jump to is that many people do enjoy these personalized ads. And I think Google definitely touches on this in the previous slide of if you're searching for one thing and you might find a deal, or the advertisement might be relevant to something that you're looking towards. But I think the important part to sort of be cognizant of is who is getting targeted. So Kathy O'Neill wrote a book, Weapons of Math Destruction, where she talks a lot about algorithms and how the black box can perpetuate biases and code our environment in a way that's not necessarily productive. So the first example was online universities and how they specifically have sent ads to areas with historically low income residents without higher education. So these online for-profit universities have high cost and low quality education, and often are pitched as a way to get out of those low income areas. And they're actually partnered with loan options that are sort of too good to be true, in the sense that they'll take any credit score and give these loans with high percentages, so that there's a huge loan debt, and the people who do receive education from these for-profit online universities don't actually have the high quality of education that they've wanted to pay for. So sort of this trap has happened when targeting specifically low-income residents. The other aspect that Kathy touched on was insurance rates. So these are actually based on gender, age, academics, make and model of car, address. So specifically to cars, they've actually outlawed having gender be incorporated into insurance rates, but insurance companies have still managed to make assumptions about gender based on the make and model of car, the color of the car, and even the age of the person, and sort of making these leaps and tying these connections back to sort of the price. And algorithms act in a way that show this black box instead of sort of how did my rate come to be what it is. And it's just another way of sort of utilizing an algorithm in a really negative way.
Is it a legal platform?
I'm not actually sure if it is federally, or if it's specifically Montana. That would have to be something I'd look up. Yeah, maybe state specific. So digital redlining, the practice of creating and perpetuating inequalities between racial, cultural, and class groups, specifically through the use of digital technologies, digital content, and the internet.
Potential consequence of personalization?
Yeah, and definitely a huge consequence of personalization that comes through, especially economically, and perpetuating biases, sexist, racist, classist ways. And I think that's another reason why our work is so important, is sort of giving that power back to the individual, and in an aspect of you do have control, and you do have, as soon as you have a bit of knowledge about what's happening, then it gives the power back to ask those questions of, well, why does my insurance rate look like this? And why is it so much higher for me than someone else? And on this, I'm going to pass it back to Jason.
Thanks, Julian. I hope people can hear me, and I'll try to go a little more slowly, but we're kind of in the last component of the presentation, and just walking back a step. People asked me to make sure I let the slides up. I know the tweet thread I put up probably was pretty concentrated set of words, so I'll try to slow down a little bit. But what I want to do is back up for us as we think about ourselves as educators or even advocates. What Julian and I have noticed is when you're wanting to talk about a technical concept like this, finding a way to show some kind of impact in a physical or material way is a way to begin the discussion. Right. So this is a moment, like if you're going to design your own exercise, these are the things that we've seen that seem to work best. Stay away from the math. Early on, we saw some exercises and or tools that really got into the various theories and formulas that were part of an algorithm, and it was kind of a showstopper, especially when you're trying to introduce something. If you can, and one of the things, we didn't really show it today, but the first module that when we really frame the discussion of algorithms, we talk about various ways that algorithms move and work in a search experience, how they work in an e-commerce experience. So demonstrating that algorithm in action and then leaving space to move from that demonstration for the group to discuss, which is what you saw us kind of doing, modeling today. But just as you think about your own instruction and your own advocacy, these principles really helped with pedagogy. Again, I mentioned that we were, we realized in the research itself that it was very daily, we would see things that talked about inequity, the way an algorithm worked to disenfranchise someone, the way it didn't get, it might have had a negative impact. We also tried to make room for the positive sides of algorithms, because there are some benefits to things like having a sense or being able to recommend along a continuum for an individual based on their interests. So along with problematizing, we wanted to also think about where our activism moment was. Like, how do we turn some of these problems into practical solutions, or what can we do to start to address them? So one of the first places we see a chance for us to work and improve algorithmic processes are in our own software and tool designs. So in some workshops, we've done workshops for developers where we actually sprint and work through a rewrite or a potential rewrite of a piece of software, like we did this institutional, how would you improve your institutional repository with transparency principles, right? Again, we don't have time to go through all of that today, but just to think through how do we build those tools where transparency is a feature, not a bug. And there's part of the grant, there's a teaching tool linked below. And basically what it allows you to do is it runs through a search experience. And then you're able to turn on an X-ray component and click on various pieces of the search experience and get more information about how, why that particular facet or this particular search result happened. So we'll share, that's linked within the project itself. And also on the slides. And we will share the slides. I know that we mentioned that we would, but you'll have access to all of these. The other thing within that software design, we started to think through the processes and tools we can use. So we have a small proof of concept where we're trying to study the YouTube algorithm to understand how it actually is recommending things. I think I noticed this with I was searching with my daughter on some pre-algebra stuff, and we fell down a rabbit hole from pre-algebra, and suddenly we were in, I don't even know where we ended up, to tell you the truth. I mean, it was from a very mathematical query, like, let's talk about pre-algebra, we moved into celebrity sightings. So it was really interesting to think through how that works. And we already benchmarked a difference between, so we're spidering the website itself and watching the experience as somebody is personally logged in, and then comparing that to the API results. And the API results are actually really clean, and they don't have the questionable recommendations. So it's been kind of interesting to see how that works. And there's another moment where we can start to introduce tools that help with auditing the algorithm itself. I use this metaphor intentionally because I think there's a sense of just the exhaust, it's pollution of sorts that we give off as we move in and out of these environments, and that trail of data that's there. So one of the things that Julian and I think about a lot is the tools in teaching that promote this awareness. And you saw us in these, really the second exercise was really kind of trying to introduce that idea of, okay, you're not building your own tool, but we can show you, we can empower you where you can turn this off, where you can see how personalization happens, why it happens, right? You can also do things, I wanted to mention this. So one of the ways that Google moves across its own ecosystem is through analytics. And you can actually, there's a tool that allows you, if within a browser, and it works with just about any browser, you can put it in as an add-on, and it will restrict Google Analytics. So it can't, as you're moving in and out of all of these environments, you're not tracked. Right? So that's one way. There are lots of other tools I could have put in here. DuckDuckGo. We're actually running this presentation in the Brave browser, which is another great tool. It does a lot of blocking. So we go on and on about how do you mitigate this, but part of the experience today was just that current awareness moment, which you saw in exercise 2. We also think there are opportunities to really extend digital literacy and connect it more closely with our own field. So we felt that there was, within the framework itself, the way that you could really bring, you saw this in the first example, authority is constructed and contextual. And that's that question about bias as you're making choices about how to program a library. So there are moments where you can actually address the kind of information literacy standards of our profession and bring algorithmic discussions forward. This is just another, see, like that second bullet there, algorithms, a creator informed by human decisions. That was, you know, Julian kind of mentioned, we saw it also in the discussion as we were pulling the pseudocode algorithm together. The, depending on who you are, what your perspective is of a library, you come with a sense of, this is how I'm going to encode a library in a certain way. And make decisions about it, and the biases show up there. I'm pausing for a moment just to read the chat. A lot of algorithms. This is from Aaron. So the examples that we've spoken to, and this is Aaron's really addressing the group, so feel free to jump in if you have other topics.
I think that just came to the panelists. So.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Else can see it. Yep.
Oh, okay. So they can't see it. So I'll read it. A lot of algorithms in academic research have less commercial goals and are maybe seen as more innocent, less ripe for misuse. But I'm wondering if people have notions about teaching, considering, evaluating the biases in something like a topic modeling algorithms and the like. So the stuff that we've shown you is really once it moves into a commercial market, and capitalism kind of has its way with an algorithm. But Aaron's kind of pointing to, there are moments where it's more just a pure mathematical formula. But even those, Aaron, I would suggest, like topic modeling has expectations about English as a first primary language, like there's a bias there. So there are ways, yeah, I think people start to look at even just those, what you're arguing, or just suggesting that they're more of the academic algorithms. They have their own kind of biases. We have, we're looking to continue some work on metadata generation via an algorithm, but even that, what we're seeing in the early parts of the TensorFlow library are, you know, you can point it at a picture of an indigenous individual and it'll say, man in space, you know, man with mountain in background, right? Again, it's so generic, and it's also not using indigenous language to describe that person, right? So there are lots of ways that even a kind of academic algorithm has its own kind of biases, and I think there's tons of work there. Aaron, that's a wonderful question. In kind of framing where we go from here, again, I want to try to connect this inspiration to ethics and law. Like you saw me ground the beginning of this discussion on a particular EU regulation that has some international scope, but there are also, yep, there are also lots of inspiring. I mean, Julian and I are not the first or won't be the last to really move through these examples. Sophia Noble is a wonderful scholar. I'm sure some of you are aware of her, and she was really, when we were designing the grant, she was an inspiration because it was the search experience that really started to grab our interest. So this is a great read. Oh, great. Somebody already posted that in the chat. There's also just a general academic course of study around critical algorithm studies. So I'm linking to them as well. And there are more and more academics thinking through this, through these questions, whether it's the kind of black box of machine learning or the way that algorithms are becoming more and more predominant. You saw that when we were starting to frame Facebook's influence. But you can also start to, there is hope, and I want to connect that inspiration to a sense of ethics. There are various organizations that are starting to draft accountability statements or even transparency. So this is the, it's an academic, the ACM, Association of Computing Machinery, but it's part of an engineering engineering organization, I would say, I guess, entity that really is interested in starting to understand and declare an interest in this kind of transparency. And it's new, like this stuff is just happening. I think when we presented on it, it had just gone, we did it this, I don't know, last summer. I guess it was last summer. Yeah. It's one of those, another one of those, this is the stuff that gives me hope. It inspires me in seeing this start to become part of the conversation, and not just in a kind of, I mentioned activism and open data activism and the way we can think about transparency and open data and algorithms, but it's also just, it's starting to become part of the culture of software engineering, which is wonderful to see. We highlighted a few of these things, just again, this is on that continuum that you saw in the GDPR statement, where there's a sense of like the logic has a right to be explained, right? And we're seeing it even in engineering code of ethics. So this is wonderful. I know we're close, so I'm going to leave. If there are other questions, we'll leave it open. But I'm going to also, I do have to give a nod to our initial funder. And actually, this grant ends in about 2 weeks. So we're wrapping up October 31. The docs and all of the that's the award number. But the docs and the all of the modules that we talk about are going to be released. There are CC BY within a GitHub account, so you could potentially use this actual, the presentation today. Anything you want to use here is also under a CC BY license, so feel free to do that. That's our home, and that's where all of our components will be stored. Everything from the teaching tool to the very basic auditing script of YouTube, modules. What else is in there? Oh, first principles of algorithms, a lot of the documentation. We fashioned, we're hoping to do a semester-long course here at MSU. So there's a syllabus there that's kind of open as an open educational resource. So there's lots to do there. This is sort of a call, feel free to reach out to us, contribute, follow along. The contribute, I mean, we're not really sure where the grant goes from here. We may do some additional work with some iSchools to look at implementation of some of this into a curriculum. But we're gonna take a little time to figure out, digest where the work has been successful, and then kind of move from there. Are there any other questions? That was IMLS, yeah. And it was a small Laura Bush professional development grant. I don't want to say small, it was $50,000. There's a little more about the grant project. And again, we'll release these slides so you can see a couple of these. I do want to also give a shout out to, you heard Julian today. We also have Marielle Karinga, who is a research assistant with us. She has been working through some of the questions of the teaching tool and the auditing of the YouTube algorithm. They're a great team. I'm kind of sad that we won't be working as closely together in about a week, but.
All right. Well, we are at time, and thank you so much to our presenters today, Jason Clark and Julian Kaptanian. And again, this webinar has been part of the Open Access Week. So I hope you all have a really great Open Access Week and are able to learn about releasing data or scholarship, or releasing some yourself. And definitely look forward to having these slides out. I do believe in the next couple of days. ACRL is pretty quick with that turnaround. And if you have further questions, definitely contact our speakers. And on behalf of the Digital Scholarship, Digital Collections Discussion Group and the Open Research Discussion Group, thank you so much for
Mhm.
attending today.
Michelle, can I also put one more plug in? I think we put out a survey, and if people
Oh, yeah.
have, we've seen some results, but if people haven't had a chance, we would love to hear more from the group. So
Sure.
we're going to drop it into before people leave, and we'll probably put it in the slides as well. We're gonna
Yeah,
drop it.
we can maybe see if we can include it in the email as well.
That's perfect.
Link. I'll make sure we talk to Lois about that. So
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. It's great to have everybody here. Thanks for making the time.
yep, thank you so much. Hope you all have a lovely day.